Well, hello there YouTube, and welcome to another portrait painting video. This is going to be about the 5 fundamental concepts, not just involved in creating a single portrait painting or anything like that, but it's going to be more about a comprehensive, let's just say, a comprehensive way of looking at how you begin a painting, compose it, design it, and ultimately complete it. And in this video we're going to do a little demonstration painting, which is going to be this. And right before we jump into the demonstration, I'd like to remind you that at the end of this video, there's going to be a little slideshow containing some of the most recent oil paintings that I've completed. Not all of them, but just a few of them for your entertainment. Welcome to the 5 fundamental concepts. And if at any point in this video you become curious as to what materials I'm using, please see the description box of this video for a list containing that info. Now we will begin with the big picture. And the big picture is an important concept, not just in a portrait sketch of a human being, but in any concept involved in painting. So that is, get the most basic elemental lines necessary to capture the entire composition of your painting. Not necessarily all of the elements, but at least go from each quadrant to each quadrant, covering exactly what you think you are going to paint. And very quickly we're going to have the envelope completely blocked in, and that's it. That's the big picture. Next, the block-in. So each one of these fundamental concepts is going to be more and more involved. So the block-in involves whether you are working linearly or with color. It involves gathering the most basic information needed to place things on your painting. Now I speak very vague. I say you're placing things because this could easily be a painting of an iguana, and I'm painting all of the parts of the iguana in there. It could be a still life where there's like flowers and orchids and statues and things. It really doesn't matter what the subject matter is, but the block-in stage is the information gathering stage, and this helps lead up to other elements of the painting. So for example, if you consider a more complicated painting, such as this Artemisia master study that was created as a demonstration for my students, the very last thing you want to do is start off with a bunch of details or a bunch of eyelashes. Instead, what you want is to have an idea first for where all of this information is going to go. Now this is just the head, but if we move further down, you're going to see that there's much more involved in it. There's a shoulder, there's hands, she's holding onto a palm, there's drapery, there's a transparent cloth, there's a still life element over here. So lots of stuff involved in this painting, and yet it can get even more complicated than that. So the very critical, fundamental aspect in the big shapes, compositionally speaking, is the same with the more complicated painting like this and the more basic little portrait sketch that we are doing over here. So there you have it. The basic design, the basic architecture for a standard human head like this is no different than a much more complicated painting like the Artemisia master study that you saw there. And the most important thing with the second fundamental concept, which is block-in, is to be able to have information that is constructed. And by constructed, I mean make sure that there are a series of straight lines and angles, whether you are working with color or working linearly. Make sure that the information that you put in is such that you can build onto it and not color in the lines or anything like that. Unless that's how you want to work, then that's perfectly fine. But make sure to gather it all in one place. And now we are going to thin out the paint a little bit just with a little bit of Gamsol, and I'm going to put in a little bit of a darker line. See how thin the paint is? A little bit of a darker mark for some of the most important accents of the face. But the basic block-in, again, is the language of which you gather the information, whether it's still life objects, eyes, nose, mouth, or whatever. So darkening those accents helps to kind of have more of an idea of where things are going to be placed. Now this takes us to the next critical part, which is light and shadow. This is the third fundamental concept. So I'm doing this a little bit differently. I'm going in with a color. So I'm working with burnt sienna. That is lead white number 2. So that's walnut oil mixed with lead white, and a little bit of soon to be cadmium green, if I recall correctly, with these mixtures. It's just a very basic red and green. Oh no, I'm wrong. That is cerulean blue. So cerulean blue is a nice and weak blue, but this isn't so much about the colors, but rather the fundamental concept involved in this. So once I have enough paint mixed up, I'm going to just very loosely cover all of the light of the face, and this will give me a very clean and concise subdivision of light and shadow. And when you do the block-in, it just naturally leads itself, it naturally leads towards the block-in. And the most important part about light and shadow is that you can differentiate, or you can figure out what the object is from a distance. So from all the way back there, you can see very little information here, very little detail with this Artemisia, and even the painting that's right behind me over there, you can barely see any detail. But from a distance, what you see first, the most important thing that you see is the impact of light and shadow shapes, just like what we're doing over here. And the key word is impact, just like I said previously. Impact is what you get, visually speaking, from putting in very crisp and clear light and shadow shapes, just like on the Artemisia that you saw and the other paintings in the background. So now that we have done that, let's go into the fourth fundamental concept, which I'm going to call planar development. And again, this video is not really about color mixing or any of the material stuff, though if you're interested in that, go ahead and ask me in the comments, and then maybe we can do another video specifically on the questions that you have. So going in with Cadmium Red, Viridian, and a little bit of, what's that? That one is Cobalt Blue. Yep, that one's Cobalt Blue. We're going to mix up some of the mid-tones here. Add a lot of paint to your brush. Make sure to use good quality brushes that can grab the paint really nicely and apply the planes. What you saw right there was my fan brush. And the fan brush, as you're seeing here, is a nice tool to make sure that the paint doesn't bulk up too heavily on the surface of the painting. So planar development is one of the longest of the concepts, and this is also something that is involved in every type of painting, not just portrait painting. So planar development means that every plane change is described through value and described through color. So I'm going to repeat myself. Every plane change is described through value, and it's also described through color. Things that get darker are darker for one or two reasons. One is because it is receiving less light. The other reason is that it is simply just darker. So since we're working with one basic structure, which is just a human face, the only real color changes are going to happen, or should I say value changes are going to happen in the sclera of the eyes and the color of the lips. Everything else is going to be pretty much changing in value just because it's receiving less light. And every time you change a plane, just like we're adding there, we started with the plane change for the nose, the side plane of the face, and the lips. Again, this is more about the fundamental concept, not so much about what the individual planes are. But every time that you put in a plane change, it's important that you describe it in terms of a color change. Now, that's not really something that you can observe that easily in a photo reference, so this is why I do say to paint from life as much as you can. So again, relating each plane to each value, and each color needs to be related to the surrounding colors. Now, when you're building the colors in this style, it can be very procedural, which is what I don't want you to get out of this. This is not a very procedural thing. Rather, this is kind of just open conversation in the painting, if you will, in terms of planes. But do not see it as a means to an end, because there are many other approaches to create the strength involved in planes. You could do a monochromatic painting, you can do a limited palette painting. There's so many different ways, but the most important thing is the concepts involved in describing these planes. And even when you paint things such as hands, for example, hands are one of the things that I struggled with the most many years ago when I started this YouTube channel. But ever since then, I've had a lot more practice. So hands are kind of just like a face. So hands have many different plane changes involved in describing them. So if we take a look at the hands, there are a whole lot of plane changes involved in these hands. So you have this topmost facing plane, just like on the face that we were painting in the demonstration. Think about this as the topmost facing plane on the face. This is the side plane of the cheekbone, and then it wraps around towards, say, I don't know, the side of the forehead. And then we're picking up more light again over here. The rest of this is in a shadow, so it's a little bit more subtle. When you look at the forearm here, this is facing the light even more. This plane is right smack in the light. It's receiving more light even than this, so it is lighter. It's going to be brighter because it's facing the light even more. And I'm describing these hands to you because it is the same as when you're painting the face in the demonstration. And even these little spikes over here and the painting, very simple. Plane here, plane there, light and shadow, and that's all it is for that. So it's the same idea, whether you're painting hands or still life objects or drapery or whatever. The planar construction, the planar development is absolutely the same. And because these concepts are absolutely the same between painting a hand, painting a still life object, or painting a face, as you're seeing this little sketch develop, you can be considering it as anything possible. Anything is possible within the realm of the fundamental concepts if you understand them and you study them with a very, very keen observation. You can see that the way that this painting is developing is universal for everything. Now, because we're working in color, one can get distracted by the color mixtures, as you're seeing here, but rather think of it as simply just planes of value, planes of color, and the rest is big structure. So we've thinned out the paint a little bit there, as you see, and we're applying some of the dark color for the hair. And I tend to like to apply the hair or anything, any structure with thin paint, not any medium, and just add color into it. So now we're going to start to build some of the shapes for the lips. The planes are now going to subdivide into smaller planes, and through the subdivision of the smaller planes, the face is going to start to develop some more form, just like, again, everything else. Just like the face on the Artemisia, just like the neck on the Artemisia, or just like the hands or the palm or all of that stuff. Once again, that fan brush is to eliminate glare and to make sure that the paint doesn't bulk up too much. Now we're going to move into the final fundamental concept, which is describe the surface. And I like to use these Sable brushes, as you're seeing here, cat's tongue Sable brushes, which allow me a much more fine point. Now, describing the surface does not mean simply rendering. Rendering is a basic, archaic term when it comes to painting. And in the past, I used to call that the last stage, but in reality, there's more to it because you're describing the surface. When you're describing the surface, as you're seeing with the hair is more fluffy, kind of like I don't know, like fluffy cotton candy or something like that. And the face is more solid. The face is somewhat porous. It's not completely matte. So when you're describing the surface, that is the ultimate stage involved in completing a painting, because you are describing the physicality of the object or objects that you are painting. Just like in the Artemisia, the metal thing was more shiny because it was metallic. The crown on the Artemisia was again shiny, it was metallic. The face was more oily looking than the drapery. The drapery was more matte than the face was. So now we're just mixing up a very simple green. This green consists of Viridian and a bunch of other colors, and we're diluting the paint a little bit again with the Gamsol. And very quickly, we're going to just cover the background of the painting. Remember, fat over lean. Common misconception is fat over lean. People think it means thick over thin or thin over thick. That has nothing to do with fat over lean. Fat over lean means the oil content. So if you thin out the paint, it doesn't mean that it's any fatter or any more lean. It's the oil content, not how thin or thick the paint is. So now we're just going and we're describing the surface even more. So we're adding smaller plane changes into the forehead, constructing the curve of the forehead, yet adding more basic plane changes concerning color and value. When you get to the describing the surface part of any painting, I'm going to show you one that is a tad bit more complicated than what you've previously seen. This is another recent painting of mine titled There is a Spider. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here. There's a human head because there's a portrait obviously in here. There are frames involved in it, there's statues, there's all kinds of things. So the surface quality varies from one object to the next. So you're seeing that the portrait is what you're used to. It's more of a, like I said, like the porousness of human skin. It also has different kind of color qualities to it. Now if you look at the sculpture down here, the sculpture has very minimal color changes because there's not much going on there in terms of color changes. There are some little planes, of course, that have color changes, but for the most part, it's kind of void of color changes, and the color changes that are in there are very minimal. It does have more of a matte quality to it, so none of the highlights here are jumping out quite as bright as, say, the highlights on the hands. So the fundamental concepts involved in describing the surfaces here in this painting are exactly the same as the little demonstration that we're doing currently. So now it's down to the fine detail and the minutia involved in it. So the nose is a little bit more oily of a surface than, say, the cheeks and the forehead. The forehead is a little bit more matte, and you see that the edge quality is now being described in a whole lot of detail. There's a lot of care now involved with turning the form on the edges of the face. And since this is a sketch, of course, it's not going to be as refined as the other paintings that you've seen on there, but those serve to contrast this more simple painting demonstration. Now we're pushing some of the color notes slightly on the nose. It's getting a little bit cooler relative to, say, the warm pinkishness of the nose and the yellowy colors on the forehead and the kind of greenish colors on the cheek. And now we're adding a little bit more brightness, using some of the lead tin yellow light to pull out a much brighter and slightly off yellow highlight. And again, you're describing the surface quality of the face through the rendering, which again is a more rudimentary definition, and the surface edge quality. Basically, all of the fine minutia that goes into what you would call finishing a portrait is part of the describing of the surface, and it's exactly the same with everything else in all of painting. So last thing to do with this little portrait sketch is to drop in a signature. And having said all of that, that is the conclusion of this video. This is what the painting ended up looking like at the end. But what I want you to get out of this demonstration is that you should not simply look for step by step how to complete a painting in a kind of like a cookbook kind of definition of creating a painting. Do not look for a recipe. Don't look for just because this person says there's 5 steps to create a painting that I must always use these 5 steps or whatever, because I've made videos like that in the past. It's important to consider, just consider for a moment, that the fundamentals, the core fundamentals involved in painting are all there is. Painting is just fundamentals, and there's more to it than the 5 fundamentals, 5 concepts that I spoke about today. There's way more to it. It's what I gave you today is just an oversimplification of what is out there in terms of the fundamental concepts. But what I've given you are key fundamental concepts where you can derive more information out of and continue to go on your pursuit of learning oil painting. Do not just simply look for a quick fix or how to do something step by step or whatever. Instead, understand what makes these paintings work. Don't just copy things, understand them. The more you increase your understanding of the concepts, the more intelligently you will paint. The more intelligently you paint, the better you will combine your mind, your heart, and your soul along with what you are doing, whether it is a master study, which is intended to emulate what someone else has done in the past, or an original painting. Be sure to think about the fundamentals. Think about what makes it work. Don't just think about a step-by-step procedural thing, because that can be very, very limiting. And speaking of limiting, if you don't want to limit your learning experience with me to just YouTube videos, please consider checking out my online classes on patreon.com/upariartist, where I have 2 lessons uploaded each week. There are a grand total of over 75 plus lessons, along with various other benefits such as painting along with me on Zoom and various other benefits. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have other concepts that you would like me to talk about, please write them in the comments. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel to see more content from me. Also check out all of the social media sites listed in the description box down below, along with information on how to purchase original paintings from me if you would like to do so. Again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you the very best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one.